Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Angela Enriquez from the World Resources Institute, Embark, and welcome to today's webinar. It's hosted by the LEDS Global Partnership and the LEDS Transport Working Group. Today, we are fortunate to have Erin Cooper, an associate here at the World Resources Institute, Embark, joining us to discuss fuels and technologies. One important note of mention before we begin our presentation is that the LEDS Global Partnership does not endorse or recommend specific products or services. Information provided in this webinar is featured on the LEDS Global Partnership website as one of many best practices, resources reviewed and selected by technical experts. Before we begin, I'll quickly go over some webinar features. For audio, you have two options. You may either listen through your computer or over the telephone. If you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option in the audio pane. By doing so, we will eliminate the possibility of feedback and echo. If you select the telephone option, a box on the right side will display the telephone number and audio pin you should use to dial in. Panelists, we ask that you mute your audio device while you're not presenting. If you have technical difficulties with the webinar, you may contact GoToWebinar's help desk for assistance. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you use the questions pane where you may type in your question. An audio recording and presentation will be posted on the LEDS GP Transport Working Group page within a few weeks. We have an exciting agenda prepared for you today that is focused on fuels and technologies. This webinar will discuss the role of different strategies to reduce emissions from the transport sector. Erin will focus on different types of fuels and relevant technologies and how they can be applied in specific situations. The webinar will conclude with a discussion on the benefits and potential trade-offs of utilizing these technologies and fuels. Before Erin begins her presentation, I will provide a short informative overview of the LEDS Global Partnership Initiative. Following the presentations, we will have a question and answer session, closing remarks, and a survey. The LEDS Global Partnership was founded in 2011 to enhance coordination, information exchange, and cooperation among countries and international programs working to advance low-emission, climate-resilient growth. The LEDS Global Partnership currently brings together LEDS leaders and practitioners from more than 160 countries and international institutions through innovative peer learning and collaboration forums and networks. The LEDS Global Partnership has three primary objectives: strengthen quality, coordinated support, and leadership of climate-resilient low-emission development strategies by countries in all regions, foster effective implementation of LEDS, and spur development of new LEDS by additional national and subnational governments. The LEDS GP delivers support through three vibrant regional platforms: the Africa LEDS Partnership, Asia LEDS Partnership, and the Latin American Caribbean Regional Platform. Each regional platform defines common country priorities that focus on the LEDS GP efforts on member-driven high-impact needs. Supporting the regional platforms are technical working groups and affiliated programs, providing technical support for implementation through 4 global work streams: planning, finance, analysis, and tools and sectors. A steering committee provides guidance and sets strategic direction for LEDS GP, and a global secretariat coordinates LEDS GP implementation, knowledge management, and outreach. The LED's GP applies open and collaborative operating approach that allows members to leverage resources and enhance coordination of climate-resilient, low-emission development activities, tools, and resources to achieve common objectives. The LED's GP is adding value to country-led LED's activities around the world through peer learning and knowledge sharing, technical collaboration, and strengthening understanding and analysis of LED's benefits. A team of international transport experts from EMBARK, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Initiative of the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities, NREL, and UNEP lead activities under this working group. The LED's Transport Working Group provides technical assistance, tools, and training on transport system strategies that support low-emission development. The working group collaborates with members at local and regional levels. Just to note that this webinar is part of a training series brought to you by the LED's Transport Working Group in partnership with UNEP and Clean Air Asia. The series will cover different topics, such as improving air quality and reducing climate impacts from the transport sectors. We're also planning 2 case studies on the topic and a webinar on financing solutions. So I would just like to introduce our presenter today, Erin Cooper, who's an associate at the World Resources Institute, where she focuses on transport, urban development, and fuels projects. So, Erin?
Great, thanks, Angela. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Erin Cooper. I work here at the World Resources Institute on a variety of transport and climate projects, and hopefully what I'll share with you today you'll find beneficial for your work. Today what I will be discussing is, first of all, the purpose of having improved fuel and emission standards in vehicles. I'll talk about some of the major pollutants that are regulated and why they're regulated. Then I'll continue with a bit about vehicle technologies and how they reduce emissions and why we need cleaner fuel in order to use those technologies. Towards the end and throughout the presentation, I will give some examples of different situations where we can see the impacts of fuels and technologies. Okay, so to start, I wanted to share a bit about our approach here. You may have heard this before if you have done some work with us at WRI or Embark. This sort of sets the stage for what we're going to talk about today, which is fuels and vehicle technologies. But we look at the transport sector and potential for reducing emissions in 3 ways. We look at ways to avoid emissions, ways to shift trips to more sustainable modes, and ways to improve the modes that we're using. So avoiding trips is improving urban development and planning. Shifting is really shifting away from private vehicles and moving to non-motorized transport or public transport. And improving is on the technology side, and that's what we're going to talk about today. This will be important as we go through, and I think perhaps you'll see why. All of these can help us reduce emissions. And one other thing before I really get into the fuels and vehicles side, why is Embark and WRI working on this topic? We do a variety of things, and because we work a lot with improving bus routes or BRT systems, we often get questions about transit bus emissions, and given all the options available, which really is the best option. So we've started our program here. It's been in some form, we've had an emissions program since the beginning of Embark, which is about 10 years ago. Our more recent work on buses has been over the last 4 years. And we want to help agencies look at global and local air quality issues as well as greenhouse gas emissions. We also want to work on real emissions or in-use emissions of vehicles, not just what happens in the testing lab, as people might have seen over the past couple of months. What we see in tests is not always what we see in reality. And we also focus on heavy-duty vehicles, but I think what I'll share today really applies to all vehicle types. So, moving on. Cleaner fuels, we've seen over time, can lead to fewer and less harmful emissions. I think, to start out, it's important for us to see some examples of where this has really worked already. This is a picture here of Los Angeles in 1967. The air quality was extremely bad. It was a very important problem that needed to be dealt with. And transport is not the only contributor to emissions, but it's one of the major contributors along with industry and some things that take place in the agricultural sector. Many things can contribute to emissions, but over time, when I have another picture, a big effort was made to reduce emissions from the transport sector. And this is a picture of the same area, downtown Los Angeles, about 5 years ago in 2010. So we can see that these efforts to improve fuel and improve technologies have worked, but at the same time you can see they haven't done everything. However, first we're going to look at the part that has really worked. So here we can see, this is a chart looking at the amount of ozone in the air over roughly the last 30 years, and that has been decreasing over time. So we know this is working, or something's working. We can also look at the U.S. as a whole. So this is a very general graphic, but it shows, this is from the EPA, it shows that while GDP has been increasing, vehicle miles traveled have been increasing, population has been increasing. On the bottom here, the aggregate emissions of these 6 common pollutants have been decreasing. So it is the technologies and various things that have been done to reduce emissions are working. So what are some of these? Let's see. So before we talk more about fuels, I want to talk a little bit about emissions. So the different pollutants we look at have a variety of impacts. Here are 3 of the major areas where we have impacts. So one is in air pollution, one is general health impacts, and one is greenhouse gas emissions. So air pollution can cause things like smog or acid rain. It can be bad for the environment in general, not comfortable for breathing. A lot of air pollution can also have severe health impacts. So one in particular that many people hear about or see in the air quality index is particulate matter emissions. And we know from reports from the World Health Organization and others that particulate matter definitely has an impact on premature mortality. In the last year, the World Health Organization released a report saying that 3 million people die every year as a result of outdoor air pollution. And some of that pollution is due to the transport sector. So those are two big impacts. More recently, of course, we've become a lot more concerned with greenhouse gases. And in general, as we reduce greenhouse gases, we can also reduce some air pollution. So those are the categories of pollutants. In transportation, these are some of our major pollutants that we look at, specifically for vehicle emissions. Carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter. Those are some of the big ones we hear about a lot. We see that a lot in the emission standards and regulations. And then others are also included in these emission standards or regulations, but maybe are not as noticeable. This includes methane, sulfur dioxide, ozone, volatile organic compounds. And this is not the full list of compounds or chemicals that come out of a vehicle, but these are some of the major things that we try to mitigate in using cleaner fuels and technologies. So these each have a variety of impacts. Some have more of an air pollution impact. Some, like I mentioned, particulate matter has more of a health impact. And now, as we're seeing more recently, black carbon, which is part of particulate matter, has also a climate impact. Methane, of course, has a climate impact. Carbon dioxide has a climate impact. So in looking at these major pollutants, we're really looking at a variety of impacts that we're trying to reduce. Okay. So if we look at cleaner fuels, one of the really successful stories that we have is that for the most part across the globe, as you can see in this map, we are using unleaded fuel. Now, this is really important because lead is extremely toxic, and so there was a major effort to remove lead from fuel. And it has been a successful effort. What is ongoing right now is a process to reduce sulfur levels in fuels. And you can see from this map, there is more of a variety of sulfur levels. There's 15 and below, which is sort of ultra low sulfur diesel. There is 15 to 50 parts per million of sulfur in diesel, which is a lower sulfur diesel, and then 50 to 500, which in some places could be considered a low sulfur diesel as well. You can see there's progress in a lot of places, but there are many places that still have very high levels of sulfur in their fuel. One of the big challenges here is that sulfur helps to produce a particulate matter and black carbon, which I mentioned have severe health impacts and impacts in terms of climate change. So it's really important for us to continue to reduce sulfur levels in fuel. But additionally, when there are lower sulfur levels in fuel, it allows for the use of improved technologies which can reduce sulfur levels in emissions even further. So yeah, here's a summary. So advantages of ultra low sulfur diesel. It it reduces the emissions of sulfur compounds, and it enables advanced pollution control technologies, as I mentioned. This type of fuel has been used in the US and in Europe, and in a report was published in 2006 about clean diesel truck and bus programs in the US, and it mentioned that that the emissions reductions associated with having a coherent program to both improve vehicle technology and improve fuels was estimated to result in $70 billion in public health and welfare benefits by reducing the number of hospitalizations and lost work days. So while these programs might take a long time to implement, it's estimated to really improve public health. So we'll get back to diesel technologies quickly, but I just want to mention this from some of our other work. You know, while we're talking about different or cleaner fuels, there's also often this debate on alternative fuels. Some of the alternative fuels that people hear about, diesel, biodiesel, natural gas, ethanol, there's a lot of people wonder which one is really the best fuel for us to use in different situations and different locations. Will one reduce emissions more than the other? Is one better for climate change or not? And if you look at a variety of studies on these topics with different vehicles, you'll see a lot of different results. In some cases, you'll see that diesel looks a lot better. In some cases, you'll see natural gas looks a lot better. In general, as fuel and technologies become more stringent, any fuel with the right technology could meet the required emission standards. So it's really a combination of fuels and technologies that that are more important rather than just switching fuels alone. Though in certain cases, switching fuels could be beneficial. And what we won't address too much today are hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles. This is slightly different, though hybrid vehicles often have diesel in them as well, so anything that's done to improve the diesel will also be beneficial for hybrid vehicles, or at least for reducing harmful emissions. And electric vehicles have no emissions but tend to be very expensive. And we also have to consider upstream emissions of the production of electricity when we take that into account to see if it's really beneficial in terms of climate impacts. So just a note on that. We actually looked at, in one of our research pieces here, we took a lot of data from different bus tests with different fuels and different technologies. And the purpose of this graph is to show if you're comparing nitrous oxides on one side and particulate matter on the other side, which are two of the main emissions, main harmful emissions, we wanted to know which fuels and technologies could meet this Euro 5 standard. And basically this graphic shows that any fuel with the right technology can meet the Euro 5 standard. And one of the more important things is that the newer technologies have less variation, so they are more likely to fall within that range. And here's another graphic. This is just looking at the standards, though. You can see that there's nitrous oxides on one side and particulate matter on the other side. And this shows the evolution of the Euro emission standards over time. And this shows a very similar thing, that the emission standards have become more stringent, and in general, similar emission standards apply to each type of fuel. So yeah, as we improve our standards, and if the standards are met by using better technologies, and then if those standards can also be enforced in the vehicles, then in general we are improving vehicles and reducing emissions. Okay. So now I'll get a bit into some of the technologies that can reduce emissions. So we've looked at the fuel, and in general, good quality fuel is needed to use a lot of these technologies that we have. So I'll start here with some of the technologies that are considered in cylinder or within the engine. And specifically with diesel engines, there might not be as large amount of emissions from carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons, but the trade-off between nitrous oxides and particulate matter is what is really important with diesel vehicles. And these technologies here that are in cylinder are considered really important for the next set of technologies, which are after treatment technologies or exhaust after treatment technologies. So these first two, fuel injection and air handling, these are both very important to get the right mix at the right time of fuel and air in the engine. It's important to have the right temperature and the right pressure to control the combustion of the fuel. And depending on the temperature and pressure and mix, you can get different types of emissions. You can get more NOx or more particulate matter and more hydrocarbons. So these two in particular are helping to control that. And it's also based on the power that's being demanded from the engine. So there's very sophisticated systems that can do this for the different engines. And so what can these do? Depending on how the process is managed, it can fuel injection can reduce the NOx, PM, and hydrocarbons. Air handling can reduce particulate matter. And then exhaust gas recirculation is somewhat different, but it takes the exhaust and recirculates it back into the engine. And this is done primarily to reduce the nitrous oxides. Part of what this does is it cools the temperature of combustion, which will produce fewer nitrous oxides. Okay. So the next set of technologies here, these are considered exhaust after treatment technologies. And each of these does a slightly different thing. They generally, though, take these harmful pollutants and change them into something that is much less harmful to health, such as carbon dioxide, water, or nitrogen. So a diesel oxidation catalyst, as you can see here, can be very effective in reducing PM, carbon monoxide, and hydrocarbons. It's a very large percentage of reduction in emissions. A diesel particulate filter is also focused on reducing particulates, and you can see in terms of particulate matter, it has a major impact on reducing that. It also can reduce carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons. Um, uh, Selective catalytic reduction, this is mixing the exhaust with ammonia. This is also done to reduce the nitrous oxides. And there's another technology, lean NOx trap, which can also reduce nitrous oxides. So in the next slide, you can see a bit how this fits together. So this isn't looking at the Euro standards, but it's looking at the EPA standards, which are fairly similar to the Euro standards. There's a list of technologies there, and then there's the engine along with the after treatments along the bottom. So you can see the different squares sort of line up. So the first, to meet the EPA 2002 to 2004, you can see that you need the higher EGR rates, and so EGR is in this first box here. To meet EPA 2007, we need the oxidation catalyst and particulate filter, and then to meet EPA 2010, we need the SCR catalyst. So we did a study, as I mentioned, this is a similar study to what we did before, looking at a lot of different fuels and technology types for buses. And when we compared these different technologies to a bus with just ultra-low sulfur diesel, you can see that all of these technologies reduced emissions. And the emissions listed here are carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxides, hydrocarbon, and particulate matter. And for each of these, the oxidation catalyst, particulate filter, exhaust gas recirculation, and the SCR, when these were added to ultra-low sulfur diesel, they really reduced emissions of all different types. So additionally, while these technologies are really important just to reduce emissions, they can't be used without this improved fuel. So if we think back to the beginning, we need to have at least a cleaner fuel, a lower sulfur fuel than the maximum. We need at least 500 parts per million sulfur in the diesel, or at most really, in order to use the exhaust gas recirculation, as well as to use the diesel oxidation catalyst. And then at most, you can have 50 parts per million sulfur in the diesel to use the diesel particulate filter and for it to be effective. So just below that, you can see that one Department of Energy study said that if you use the particulate filter with 150 parts per million of sulfur, it will not reduce PM emissions. And if you use something higher than that, it actually becomes a source of PM emissions, in this case 350 parts per million sulfur. So it is really important to have the cleaner fuel in order to use this better technology. So one example then of a cleaner fuel that is coming online soon is in the Philippines, starting with the Euro 4 standard. This was recently adopted as a law, and this will move to Euro 4 diesel with a sulfur content of 50 parts per million. So based on everything that I've shown, this means that some of the most advanced technology will be available to reduce emissions even further. So this is really positive for improving health and improving the environment in the Philippines. In addition to improving the fuel, there are also specific emissions regulations for passenger vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, motorcycles, and other types of vehicles. So this is very good. There's lots of this law is touching on a lot of different areas. It also touches on in-use vehicles as well as new vehicles, and addresses these major pollutants that we've talked about already: carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, nitrous oxides, and particulate matter. So that's one good example. I have a couple other examples of some work we've done to demonstrate the benefits of reducing or of using fuels and other technologies, as well as some other approaches to reducing emissions. So as I said in the beginning, we look at transport emissions reductions in terms of avoid, shift, and improve. And in this, we're mostly looking at improve, so the fuels and technology side. But there are other things that can be done, such as advanced maintenance or improving routes, so you're driving shorter distances, or improving the way that we drive to reduce fuel consumption. And these can all help to reduce emissions. So some of the work here, we have looked at different options in bus routes for reducing emissions, and we have some sample results here. Yeah, we'll see. So I'm going to share our results for CO2 emissions and for particulate matter emissions. And actually, just to clarify, we looked at we looked at hybrid vehicles, natural gas vehicles, and ultra-low sulfur diesel vehicles. And we made an assumption, just to do a test scenario, that we're changing a fleet of Euro 3 buses to Euro 5 buses. So we wanted to look at the different options for reducing emissions. So here is our graph for CO2 emissions. So every option that we had, and we have some combinations of options, every option reduced emissions. We have on the left ultra-low sulfur diesel, and then there's ultra-low sulfur diesel combined with advanced maintenance, and ultra-low sulfur diesel combined with driver training. That's followed by CNG. That's followed by different hybrid options, and then that's followed by route optimization. So in this case, reducing CO2 emissions depended a lot on route optimization, but I want to come to look at the hybrid vehicles, since we're talking about vehicles. They were also a very big source of emissions reductions in this particular test, between 20 to 30% emissions reductions above the baseline. So it's important for us to think about this. Even though for reducing CO2 emissions, ultra-low sulfur diesel may or may not be the most important, improving fuels and vehicles is important, especially in the future if we want to use hybrid vehicles, because you're still improving the quality of the fuel and technology that could be used in hybrids, which include a diesel engine and an electric motor. And then if we look at this data also in terms of PM reductions or particulate matter reductions, so again, we're comparing Euro 3 to Euro 5. Every option that we looked at made a huge reduction in particulate matter, between 90 to 100%. So this is extremely beneficial. What this is saying is whatever fuel and other improvement that you do, you're really making a positive impact on people's health and on the environment. Okay, so now I'll share another example we have from the Philippines. I'm not sure who. We have this example of a green fleet program that was implemented with Meralco South Distribution Services. And for this, they use the UNEP Toolkit for Clean Fleets, which has a lot of good information and understanding the different options for improving fleets. There's a fleet, they had a fleet of 300 vehicles that included passenger vehicles and trucks. In 2009, they had a goal of improving fuel efficiency, and so they developed a baseline for their fuel consumption and kilometers traveled in 2008. And as a result of this, using that information and some information from the Clean Fleets kit, they were able to determine how much particulate matter they were emitting and then determine how they wanted to approach reducing emissions. And they had some priority areas which included pickup trucks, vans, and basket trucks. And they also found that eco-driving, improved maintenance, and using the right vehicles could help reduce emissions. So using all of this information, they were able to improve their fuel efficiency by 16% and reduce CO2 emissions by 10% and reduce PM emissions by 4%. So it was successful, and they are employing a variety of options, better maintenance, the right vehicles, and the right training. So I guess that is most of the information. Just in summary, improving fuels, improving the refining process, getting new vehicles and improving the technologies that are needed in vehicles to use these new fuels. It might be a long process, but really it's very important for public health, for the environment, and for climate change. And as emissions in the transport sector are growing very quickly, we do need to take a lot of action. So the vehicle side is important, but there are many other approaches, which I've just touched on a bit here, which will also help to reduce transport emissions and create a better environment. Now we're ready for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. So just a reminder, everyone can type in their questions in the question pane. If you have any questions for Erin, please feel free to type them in there. So let's see. So I guess for the first question, what advice do you have for countries that are planning to implement cleaner fuels, and what barriers should be considered?
I would say first, as I mentioned, it can be a long process. There are a lot of potential steps to go through to improve fuels and really improve technologies. The current vehicle fleet we have is not going to immediately disappear, so it will be with us for a while, and we still have to consider current vehicles and how to work with them. But I think one thing is there is a lot of advice available. There are a lot of programs like the UNEP Partnership for Clean Fuels and Vehicles. There are many groups that are working on roadmaps to improve possibly fuel economy or improve the quality of fuel. So I would tap into those international advice that's available for different specific topics. There are also other examples that can be followed. And I think there are potentially many approaches for improving fuels in the short term and long term. I think one of the big barriers is really cost, not just cost of well, I mentioned this, not just cost of improving the refining process and all of that, the cost of the vehicles themselves. So whenever we're improving new vehicles, we want to make sure that it's something that the consumer can afford. If not, there is a potential to create a large second-hand vehicle market. This may or may not apply as much in certain places, but especially in places with easy access to older vehicles, there can be a very large market, which means that it will take a longer time for the newer technologies to penetrate.
Thank you, Erin. So for the next question, can you give us other examples from developing countries where implementing cleaner fuels has been successful?
Yeah, one of the more recent examples is Brazil. While I guess in their rural areas they still have a higher fuel or higher sulfur content in their fuel, in all of their major cities and sort of mid-sized cities, they have ultra-low sulfur diesel. So this opens up a lot of options within Brazil. So that's one case. Another case is actually Mexico. They are using some ultra-low sulfur diesel. I guess one challenge there has been they don't necessarily have the refining capacity for all the ultra-low sulfur diesel they want. So they are buying some of it from the U.S., which could make it more expensive. But they are able at least to start using ultra-low sulfur diesel.
Great. And then, so we have a question from the audience. What is the most economical technology for emission reduction?
Most economical. That is a very good question. I would say that is very vehicle specific, and it's also somewhat specific to the use of the vehicle. I think one thing when we talk about how economical something is, incentives really come into play. So, for example, this is slightly different than what we've been talking about, but actually electric vehicles in the Netherlands and in Norway have been extremely popular, and this is partly to do with the fact that their vehicles in those countries can be very expensive to start with, so the additional cost of an electric vehicle is not that high, and there have also been a lot of incentives provided by the government. So as long as they were providing these incentives, there was a lot of growth in electric vehicles because it became an economical option for them. I think it really depends on the vehicle. It really depends on the use. But in general, a diesel vehicle tends to be cheaper. Sometimes when you're buying a whole fleet of vehicles, however, you can get different. You can get different incentives from either the government or from manufacturers. So it's really hard to say exactly which vehicle is cheapest. I would say you have to look at each case and look at a specific set of technologies.
Thank you. Do you believe that the corporate average fuel economy standards will force passenger automobile producers in the United States to shift to alternative fuels other than gas and diesel?
Let's see. This, I would have to say that I am not sure that it will. I have to say I work more with our heavy-duty vehicles than with our light-duty vehicles, so I'm not sure I want to strongly comment on this.
Okay.
But yeah.
What do you think about real-world drive cycle tests for advanced MRVs?
I think, well, what we've seen in our work is that there is a big difference between real-world testing and the other types of testing. I think, there is really there's a group that is working strongly on improving the quality of testing. There are some of the people that have been involved in some of the recent issues. I think it's clearly important as you see when you look at drive cycles that represent very urban areas with a lot of stop-and-go traffic, you see certain results, and then when you look at a drive cycle that represents a more suburban area, you see a different set of results. So I think, this is something that hasn't just been part of this project, but has been part of other projects that WRI has done in the past. So I think incorporating how people really use their vehicles is important. Oh, they're still, okay. So
okay. So another question we have is, so this one is specific to the case of the Philippines, but I think Erin can, any case that's relevant. How do countries manage to implement the emission standards regulations for used vehicles? How can they prove what type of vehicle is coming into the country and which emission standards it's complying with?
As far as I know about this, it's still under implementation, but I think as they do, what they have are standards based on different years of vehicles. So you don't necessarily need to immediately get rid of your older vehicle, but it should meet certain standards. All of these come down to how good you are at enforcing certain regulations, which is a question in a lot of places. I don't think it's just a question in the Philippines. So I think we're still waiting to see the effectiveness of the implementation there.
Okay. Do you have an example of another country that has successfully implemented or regulated used vehicles?
I think successfully. There have been many attempts at regulation. I mean, we have used vehicles in a lot of places. It's about trying to make sure that there is an incentive to actually follow through with the testing and comply with the testing, and having good results come out of your different vehicle testing. So that is a very, I think it's sort of a different type of enforcement issue.
Okay. Well, we're coming pretty close to time, so thank you everyone for your questions. Again, if you have any follow-up questions, you can always email Erin. Her contact information is on the presentation, or email us at the Ledge Transport Working Group, and we can connect you with Erin. So now we'd like to ask for the audience to take a minute to answer a quick survey on the webinar that you viewed today. So the first question, the webinar content provided me with useful information and insight. Okay. The next question, the webinar's presenters were effective. And the last question, overall, the webinar met my expectations. Okay, thank you for answering our survey. On behalf of the LEDS Global Partnership and the Transport Working Group, I'd like to thank you to all the attendees for participating in today's webinar. We've had a terrific audience and very much appreciate your time. I'd like to invite the attendees to check the LEDS GP website over the next few weeks if you'd like to view the slides and listen to today's recordings. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again in future LEDS GP events. This concludes our webinar. Thank you.